The world's writers will walk through those gates, and if you hang around, you get a chance to talk to them.
I'm interested in conversations that deal with things that matter, but real, how do we live our lives?
First of all, make climate change personal in your life. The second step is get angry and get active. And the third step, and believe it or not, I think this is the most important. We have to imagine this world that we want to hurry towards.
It's about kindness is looking at people as people and not as I voted this, I do this, whatever it is. There are some people we will never get along with, but most of us are a complex mass of different things.
My name is Rajesh Hadi. I've been participating in the Edinburgh International Book Festival for many years. The festival has been central to my development as a writer. The thrill I feel as I enter Charlotte Square has never waned. I could always count on excellent programming and stimulating discussions. There has never been a time when such meetings are more important.
We were looking for novels that had a really clear and potent voice that haunted us and stayed with us. We were looking for novels that were incredibly well translated.
Literature is the one art form that puts us completely in somebody else's shoes. It's the supreme act of empathy, as crucial to the survival of the human spirit as water or air. Welcome to the world in words.
Hello to everybody. Welcome to this event in the Edinburgh International Book Festival. We are here to talk about and to have more insights about the book The Adventures of Chinairon. In Spanish is Las Aventuras de la Chinairon. I'm Mariana Enriquez. I'm Argentinian. I'm a writer too, but here I'm, acting as, how do you say this, chair, presenter, whatever. And we are here with all the responsibles of getting this book, this very important book in English. You know probably that the book is up in the shortlist for the Man Booker Prize, which makes me personally very proud of Gabi, because I think she's a very good writer that deserves everything and this kind of recognition. And also because the book is very good, so the book deserves it too. So who are these people? Gabriela Cabezón Cámara, that is the author of this book that was published by Charco Press, that it's publishers from here, from Edinburgh, and it's doing a great job bringing Latin American literature to the UK and to the English speaking world, I think. Gabriela has 4 novels already. La Virgen Cabeza, I think it's 2009. Then El Romance de la Negra Rubia in 2014, I think. I'm mixing up a bit, but doesn't matter. Then Le Viste la Cara a Dios, which was also released under a different name as a graphic novel, is from 2011. And of course, this book that in Argentina was released in 2017. Already said that this is up for the Man Booker. She was also a journalist. I don't think she's working as a journalist anymore. And she does workshops of creative writing, and you know, she's universally loved too because she's nice. If I miss something, doesn't matter. This is enough. The translator then Fiona Mackintosh. I'm saying hello because I don't know if you can see her, but I can. Fiona is a senior lecturer in Latin American literature, a general editor for the Forum of Modern Language Studies, and a co-head of Spanish, Portuguese, and Latin American Studies Department of European Languages and Culture in the University of Edinburgh. She's smart. Then is Iona Macintyre. There's the other translator. There's 2 translators for this book. She's a senior lecturer for Spanish, Portuguese, and Latin American Studies, Department of European Literature, Languages, and Culture, also from the University of Edinburgh. So this is the part that works like this. I'm going to do the questions to Gabriela, to the author, in Spanish, and then Mariana Casale, that is the translator, is going to translate our conversation. Then they're going to read the part so you can see. This is a very difficult book to translate, in my opinion, for many reasons. And so it's interesting the work that these women have done. And then I'm going to make the questions in English for Fiona and Iona. So Mariana, are you ready? Gabi, are you ready? And I switch to Spanish. No. It's early here, so this changing of languages, let me tell you, it's kind of strange. Bueno, Gabi, ¿cómo estás? Te veo ahí en el campo.
Bien, conocidos. Bien.
Bien, qué sé yo. Primero me gustaría que le cuentes al público brevemente un poco sobre el Martín Fierro, qué le pasa a la China, que es la protagonista, en el Martín Fierro, que es como nuestro poema nacional. Esto daría para meses, pero quiero decir. Y también un poco, ¿no?, lo que es la gauchesca como un género argentino.
Dale.
So, hello, Gabi. I can see that you are there in the countryside. It's good to see you there. I'd like you to tell the audience a little bit about Martín Fierro, which is our foundational book, and what happens to the China in the Martín Fierro. And what was the last part, Mariana?
¿Qué es la gauchesca? Yes.
And to tell us a little bit about what Gauchesque literature is, please.
Ok, hola a todas, a todes, a todos. Estoy muy contenta de estar acá en Edimburgo, aunque sea de modo virtual. Espero que la próxima vez no sea virtual. Y voy a hablar primero de la gauchesca. La gauchesca es el género popular de la consolidación de la República Argentina. Comienza más o menos con la revolución que nos libera del poder colonial español para atarnos a otro, pero no importa, eso sería otra discusión. Y comienza a ser enunciada en una primera persona del plural. Nosotros los valientes, nosotros los gauchos, nosotros los que vamos a ser desde ahora iguales a todos los demás hombres en la ley.
Hello, I'm very happy to be here in Edinburgh in some way, albeit virtually. I hope next time it's not virtually. I'm going to start backwards I'm going to tell you a little bit about Gauchesque literature. So Gauchesque literature is the popular genre that consolidates the Argentine Republic, and it starts with the revolution that liberates us from the power of the colony. It's told in the first person plural, and it says everywhere, us, the courageous, us, the gauchos. So it's spoken in the first person.
Bueno, estas promesas que se le hicieron al gaucho de igualdad ante la ley fueron, por supuesto, absolutamente defraudadas. Entonces, la gauchesca va siguiendo con mucho humor, con mucho ritmo y también con alguna posibilidad de regodeo en la crueldad y en la sátira del adversario político, toda la evolución de esta clase del gaucho, y que es de alguna manera la evolución del país. Para hacerla corta, esto comienza en una segunda persona eufórica y valiente yendo a la guerra contra España, en una primera persona plural, perdón, y termina en Martín Fierro, la gauchesca histórica. Martín Fierro
So when these promises of equality before the law are not kept, the Gauchesque literature follows with humor, rhythm, and cruelty, and with satire of the political adversary. It becomes it begins to be told in the second person plural, euphorically against Spain, and it ends up in Martín Fierro.
Martín Fierro es el final de este ciclo histórico, es la derrota de la clase gaucho. El gaucho era el campesino pobre. Por eso Martín Fierro es el canto de un hombre que es secuestrado por el ejército argentino para ser llevado a pelear contra los indios.
So this is the song of Martín Fierro, which closes this period. Could you repeat that bit again, Gaby, please? ¿Puedes repetir la última parte, por favor?
Sí, cómo no. Martín Fierro es secuestrado por el ejército argentino, eso se llamaba leva y era legal, y es obligado a ir a pelear contra los indios. Eso no necesariamente sucede.
So Martín Fierro is taken, he is basically kidnapped by the army to go and fight against the Indians. It was a system that was legal, which doesn't really happen, but he is taken by the army to go and fight against the Indians.
Y el ejército lo usa para trabajar gratis en estancias, que es una costumbre de la burguesía argentina, usar a los gauchos para eso.
So the army takes Martín Fierro to work for free in the estancias, so the large ranches in Argentina. So therefore he's used for free labor.
Y bueno, es un hombre que está muy desesperado, muy triste, que se queda sin vida y se va desgraciando.
So he is a man who is utterly desperate, who has lost his life, and he gradually loses his identity. He loses who he is. He becomes increasingly desperate.
En el poema novela, cuando a él se lo lleva el ejército, la China se queda sola, casi desnuda. Tiene 2 o 3 líneas nada más. Él se va, ella se queda sin nada.
So in the narrative poem, when he leaves, the China is left alone, almost naked and destitute, and she only speaks very few lines.
y enseguida desaparece del poema. Al final hay alguna mención que dice que se habrá ido con otro porque no podía vivir por sus propios medios.
So as soon as that happens, she pretty much disappears from the poem, except for very few mentions towards the end where it probably says that she has gone away with some other man because it's implied that she can't live by herself.
Okay. I wanted this introduction because even when the book can be read by everybody, it's important to emphasize that this is a very local book that has a political root in our literature and in our history. And I'm going to do a kind of a wild relation here, but somehow the operation that Gaby does to the China, ahora te traduzco, Gaby. The operation that does to the China is kind of similar to what Jean Rhys does with Bertha Mason in White Sargasso Sea. There is a woman that is in Jane Eyre is totally in the shadows, you know, in the room, and then she gives her voice. No, estaba diciendo que me hace acordar de alguna manera a la operación, es muy extraño, ¿no? Que hace Jean Rhys en El ancho mar de los sargazos, que agarra a Bertha Mason, que es la mujer que en Jane Eyre está como apenas mencionada, y le da una voz, le da una novela. Esto es muy parecido porque la China, incluso los lectores de la China podemos haberla olvidado por completo. La pregunta es la siguiente. ¿En qué momento para mí es una operación política, es una operación de visibilización y es una introducción de las mujeres y de los cuerpos de las mujeres en esta historia que habían sido borrados y que los abusos sobre ellas habían sido borrados más allá de lo muy brutal, ¿no? La cautiva, la violada, quiero decir, como una cosa absolutamente utilitaria. Vos la convertís a ella en un personaje y a Liz, que es la inglesa y su amante, también en un personaje. Quiero que nos hables brevemente de ese proceso, de ese momento que dijiste, quiero escribir sobre la China, le quiero dar una voz a esta mujer en la Pampa.
So I am interested in the political operation of making visible, because in some way this is an introduction of the women and the bodies of women that had been abused and had been erased, and in some way you turn these women into main characters. You make the China and Liz main characters, characters that had been erased from the story. So I would like us to talk to us a little bit about that political operation of making this visible, please.
Bien, cuando se me ocurrió hacer esto, yo estaba en California, en Berkeley, tenía una beca divina, el lugar era hermoso, lleno de árboles y de sol, había descubierto el Pinot Noir y estaba leyendo muchísima Gauchesca porque tenía que dar un curso de escritura creativa y se me había ocurrido narrativa en verso, y narrativa en verso en Argentina es Gauchesca.
So when I thought about this, when I came up with the story, I was in California, I had a scholarship, I was having a great time in a beautiful place, reading a lot about Gauchesque literature. And so that's how I came up with this, because in the midst of thinking of coming up with ideas for a course that I was teaching, Gauchesque literature seemed very apt.
Y bueno, leyendo tanta Gauchesca se me hizo carne, sentí en el cuerpo lo que ya sabía, que es que no había ninguna voz de mujer.
So reading so much Gauchesque literature, what became embodied, what I felt through my body, was that there was no female voice in this genre.
Y pensando como pienso que de alguna manera Martín Fierro es el poema novela que cuenta cómo se terminó consolidando la Argentina, quise contar esa historia, relativamente la misma historia, desde el punto de vista de una chica.
And considering that, thinking as I do, that Martín Fierro is the narrative poem that consolidates Argentina, I wanted to tell the same story, but from the point of view of a woman.
Y como estaba ahí tan contenta y con tanto sol y tantas ardillas y tanto Pinot Noir, me sentía muy bien y quise contar esta historia no solo desde el punto de vista de una chica, sino quise dotar a la chica de una vida luminosa, feliz, hermosa.
So as I was having such a lovely time, I had discovered Pinot Noir, I felt very comfortable. So I not only wanted to tell this story from the point of view of a girl, of a woman, but I wanted to give this woman luminosity. I wanted to give her a luminous life that was beautiful, that was full of beauty.
Y de hecho, tratándose de un poema que relata cómo se terminó construyendo la Argentina, cómo se dividió el poder, que fue un proceso horrible y cruento del que todavía no nos podemos librar, uno de los problemas que tenía era cómo contar una vida luminosa en esas circunstancias horrendas en que se terminó de consolidar mi país.
So bearing in mind that I was narrating the completion, the consolidation of the Argentine nation, which was a very painful and a very horrible process, I was faced with the challenge of telling a beautiful, luminous story in the midst of the horrible way in which my country ended up being conformed and consolidated as a nation.
Estás. No solo es luminosa la historia de la China, que es un aprendizaje, además. Ella viene de un lugar, digamos, de un lugar de desamparo en el que apenas sabe hablar, diría. Aunque tiene hijos y todo, es muy pequeña, además. Y tiene esta relación que la conecta con el mundo, con una mujer británica, con Liz. ¿Por qué elegiste a una mujer británica, sabiendo lo compleja que es la relación con Inglaterra en ese momento? Como, es una figura también ambigua la de Liz, yo creo, no es como la liberadora absoluta y tal, creo que tiene su complejidad. Pero me interesaba saber por qué es una mujer británica la que le abre el mundo y su propio deseo, ¿no? Porque las escenas de sexo son maravillosas.
So not only is the China a luminous character, she evolves, she's in a learning process. She is utterly destitute, she is helpless. She has children, but she can barely talk. So I'm interested to know why you chose a British woman alongside the China, seeing as the relationship with Great Britain is such a complex one. But Liz doesn't come across as the savior or the liberator. She is a much more complex character than that. So I was really interested to find out how you had decided to choose this British woman and to narrate her in this way.
Bien, al principio decidí que fuera inglesa, porque al principio de Martín Fierro hay un inglés que es también llevado por la leva, o sea, secuestrado por el ejército argentino por error. Entonces pensé, bueno, por ahí habrá quedado una inglesa.
So at first I thought that I wanted an English woman as a character, because there is in Martín Fierro at the very beginning an English character who is also kidnapped or taken by the Argentine army. So I thought there must be a British woman left behind somewhere in the same way.
Y en la medida en que pensé escribirla, me fui encariñando, entonces quise que fuera escocesa, porque por algún motivo misterioso para mí, siempre me interesó Escocia y no sé, le tenía cariño.
So as I started writing her, I became increasingly fonder and fonder of her. I started really liking her. So I decided she had to be Scottish, because I felt that I have this fondness for Scotland. So I thought I'll make her Scottish then.
Y la relación de Argentina con el Reino Unido es una relación, bueno, que podría describirse solo con mostrar un mapa de las rutas ferroviarias.
So the relationship between Britain and Argentina is the kind of relationship that can be illustrated just by looking at a map that shows the railway lines.
Es una relación de extractivismo, fue una relación de extractivismo, o sea, se llevaban todo lo que les servía para producir sus manufacturas, era una relación colonial.
So it was an extractivist relationship, it was a colonial relationship, because everything that could be taken was taken, so therefore it was an extractivist relationship.
Y sin embargo, también pensé en todo lo que podía saber una mujer joven que hubiera nacido en Escocia en la segunda mitad del siglo XIX, que era un montón, justamente porque el Reino Unido era el centro del mundo, el centro del imperio.
So I thought of everything that a Scottish woman from the second half of the 19th century would know. That would have been a lot, because, of course, Great Britain was the center of the world, it was the center of empire.
Entonces, en su carreta, Liz podía tener productos de todo el planeta. Y a través de esos productos, por ejemplo, el té, las sábanas de algodón.
So I figured in her cart, Liz would have products from all over the world, such as tea and cotton sheets.
Y ese sería un modo muy interesante en el que la China podía empezar a aprender el mundo.
So that could be a very good way in which China would come into contact with the world and learn things about the world.
Entonces ella descubriría embelesada y feliz y deslumbrada la textura de la seda.
So she would discover the texture of silk in a delighted and bedazzled and amazed way.
Y entonces Liz podría hablarle de China. Podría hablarle.
So Liz could talk to her about China.
Podría hablarle de cómo se producía la seda, de cuánto trabajo llevaba, de lo doloroso y tremendo que podría ser ese trabajo y a la vez lo bella que era la seda.
About how silk was produced, how it was made, how painful that process could be, and at the same time how beautiful silk was.
Entonces, a través de los diferentes productos, el té, el whisky, las sábanas de algodón, lo que fuera, la China empieza a entender que el mundo es una esfera que además de lo que ella conocía, que era su propio pago y la noción de la existencia de España y la noción de existencia del Reino Unido, justamente por estas relaciones coloniales.
So through knowledge of these elements and these objects like silk and whiskey and cotton, China would know what the world was like and what that relationship with Britain was like.
Y además hay una cuestión que tiene la cultura de los países del tercer mundo con los países muy centrales del primero, que tiene que ver con cierto deslumbramiento. Digamos, la metrópoli, además de someter, seduce. Y aún hoy, esa concentración de saber, esa concentración de poder y esas manufacturas sofisticadas nos siguen resultando muy seductoras.
Because there's something about the colonial relationship that is awe-inspiring. So apart from subjugating, the colony seduces. So there's something about this concentration of power that appears seductive.
Y por otra parte, lo bueno de que Liz fuera escocesa era que entonces tan del imperio no era.
So a good thing about Liz being Scottish was that therefore, being Scottish, she wasn't such an important part of the empire anyway. She wasn't so imperialistic anyway.
Y además es súper hot, Liz, es como una pelirroja muy hot. Hay algo, digamos, que no necesariamente es una pregunta, pero hay una cuestión con la sexualidad que sí me interesa porque yo no sé mucho sobre la gauchesca. No quiero contar demasiado tampoco sobre la novela, pero está Rosa, está Rosario. Quiero decir, hay un montón de personajes queer. ¿Vos lo habías encontrado en la gauchesca o es también una operación de visibilizar esto? O no sé si de visibilizar, pero un gusto por contar esta especie de utopía queer de alguna manera.
So it must be said that Liz, of course, is very hot. So she's a very sexy redhead. There's something really striking about sexuality in the novel. I don't want to spoil the novel, but I wondered about these queer characters. There's, of course, Rosa later on, and I wondered whether you had found, whether this was a way of making visible queer characters, or whether you had found queer characters in Gauchesque literature already.
Bueno, es una mezcla. Algo queer de una manera salvaje. En la gauchesca hay un poema que se llama La Refalosa, en el que se cuenta cómo se degüella a un hombre, en el que se dice, mientras el pobre tipo se está muriendo, se dice, y para nosotros no es mengua el besarlos en la lengua. El matadero comienza con una violación de un hombre hacia otro hombre, y en Martín Fierro, la relación de Fierro con Cruz es una relación de amor que puede tener consumación sexual o no, la verdad que todo da a pensar que sí, pero no importa, hay algo de lo queer, pero por supuesto entre varones, las mujeres no importábamos ni para coger. No.
Of course,
ni para coger con nosotras, como...
Of course, there's something savagely queer in Gauchesque literature. There's a poem called La Refalosa, which is a term that's very difficult to translate without a very long explanation, but where there is, it's a very violent poem, and there's the torture of a man who had been raped by another man. And of course, and there's a line there that says, and for us, that speaks about tongue kissing. And of course, there's a lot of very violent sex in Gauchesque literature, always involving men, never women. Women don't figure in any way whatsoever. There's no sex, no women in Gauchesque literature. Of course, there's the relationship between Fierro and Cruz in Martín Fierro, which can be interpreted as a loving relationship, and it might be interpreted as a queer relationship too.
Sí, y también está esa relación contada en la China. la de Cruz y Fierro, quiero decir, pero no digo más nada de la novela. Y voy con mi última pregunta para vos, Gaby, que es una mezcla de cosas, así pasamos a las traductoras y no estamos para siempre. Otro de los sujetos que no solo en la literatura, sino en la vida en general argentina están absolutamente marginados son nuestros pueblos originarios. Creo que en la novela hay en la parte final, hay un momento de enorme respeto y visibilidad de los pueblos, pero además hablando, utilizando su lenguaje, derrumbando algunos prejuicios de la literatura, sobre todo sobre ellos, y ellos abrazando a estos personajes, ¿no? Casi de una manera utópica, pero que es muy interesante. Esto está ocurriendo en la... Bueno, primero eso y después te pregunto, además, una cosa que yo tengo la sensación con la novela, que es una novela que también está cerca de tu interés por las cuestiones ecológicas, por los ecocidios que se están produciendo en la Argentina y demás. Pero primero quería, y sobre todo, ¿qué leíste de los pueblos originarios? ¿Cómo te documentaste? Porque encuentro que no es tan sencillo.
So, and there's something about the relationship between Cruz and Fierro in the novel, but I'm not going to give any spoilers. Something I really wanted to ask you about, and that's important to me, is original peoples and how they have been marginalized, not just in literature, but generally. And you have given them with respect, with utter respect, you have given them visibility, especially towards the end of the novel, where you have used a variety of languages, incorporated original languages, where you debunk literary prejudices against them and create not just a utopian view of them, but a very real one. I also wanted to, I wondered how you had documented yourself, what research you had done, you had carried out about the original peoples that you depict in your novels. And later on, I'd like to ask you also about environmentalism and the environmental crimes that are being committed, which I know is a topic very close to your heart.
Bien. Varias cosas. A mí no me gusta decir pueblos originarios porque suena pasado y no hay nada más contemporáneo que los indios y que la lucha que están llevando a cabo los indios hoy.
So I don't like to use the term original peoples because that sounds old-fashioned and it talks about the past. I want to talk about Indians because there's nothing more current than Indian people and the struggles that they are facing today.
El genocidio de los pueblos amerindios nunca jamás terminó. En este momento se sigue prendiendo fuego, se sigue invadiendo, se sigue haciendo minería, se sigue talando, se está destrozando el territorio americano con el mismo extractivismo desde el principio de la conquista, y esto pasa en Brasil y también en mi país.
So the genocide of Latin American Indians has never stopped. Fires are still raging, people are still being killed, extractivism is rampant, and this happens in my country and it happens in Brazil.
Y en toda América Latina.
And in the whole of Latin America, of course.
Y sí, es difícil documentarse. Estoy haciendo en este momento una investigación muy profunda y hallo que la razón occidental, que es una razón que ya ha dado todo lo que tenía para dar, y eso fue muy cruento para muchos y muy bueno para otros.
So I am doing a lot of research at the moment, and research is very difficult because I think that Western reason, which is pretty much exhausted, and it has been very productive and very fruitful for some and not so much for others.
Bueno, creo que esa razón está agotada y que lo que tenemos que aprender ahora es lo que los indios saben.
So now,
Please, go you, Mariana.
Thank you. Now that Western reason sees itself exhausted, and what we have to do is focus on what the Indians have to teach us, what they know.
Estoy leyendo en este momento, por ejemplo, a un chamán Yanomami que se llama David Copenagua, que cuenta.
I am reading a shaman called Danny Copenagua, who tells that
dice que el fin de los tiempos va a ser cuando acaben con la selva. ¿Por qué? Porque cuando se acabe la selva, se nos va a caer el cielo encima.
He says that the end of times will come when the forests are finished, when they're utterly destroyed, because what will happen then is that the skies will fall on us.
Él lo dice muy hermosamente, y lo que está diciendo es, en ese sentido, absolutamente consistente con lo que dice la ciencia occidental. Cuando terminen con la selva, nos quedamos sin mundo.
He says it very, very beautifully, and this is borne out by science as well, which says that effectively, when rainforests end, our world will end too. We're going to be left with no planet.
Entonces, esta idea de que somos parte del mundo, de que nuestros cuerpos viven en el mundo, se alimentan del mundo, se correlacionan con otros seres, y que esta relación podría ser distinta, más feliz, y podríamos estar dejándole aire, agua a nuestros hijos, nietos y bisnietos, a mí me parece muy interesante y me parece la lucha que a mí más me interesa dar. En la novela intenté representar la belleza de un mundo organizado más por su razón que por la de Occidente.
And this idea that we inhabit the world, that we are bodies in the world, is very important, and this is what remains. So once this Western reason is exhausted, and we come back to the idea that we inhabit the world with our bodies, this is what I wanted to talk about, because this is what remains.
Bueno, y por último, solo quisiera agregar algo que no te contesté antes, Mariana, respecto de las escenas de sexo de la China, que me dijiste que te gustaba mucho, muchas gracias. Están ahí por el puro gusto de escribirlas.
So I really wanted to talk to you about something you asked me earlier, Mariana, and about the sex scenes in the book. I just really wanted to say that those sex scenes are there because I had enormous pleasure writing them, just the sheer pleasure of writing them.
That's how it has to be. I want to thank you, Mariana and Gabriela. I'm going to go to the translator. Gracias a las dos. Voy a ir a las traductoras. And it's
I want to thank you both also. Thank you so much.
No, thank you. But there's nothing better than a book that is smart, talks about colonialism, talks about environmental issues, and has the pleasure of sex. You have to read it. That's one of the reasons that it's been very well received. And okay, for Iona and Fiona, because we talked about, I think people can see that this is a very complex book. And it's a very complex book in terms of concept and in terms of language. So I wanted to ask you first, which were the, the challenges, the most important challenges in translating this book, and if you thought, and how did you think about the British readers, how to bring this to them. Fiona, if you can start, and then Iona, maybe you want to add something, then I'm going to do the other way around.
Okay, thanks very much to Gabby and to Mariana for the discussion so far. Yeah, for us, I think there were loads of different challenges in this novel. I mean, lots of culturally specific things to Argentina, lots of vocabulary to do with the landscape, to do with Gaucho culture, to do with names, and all of these things presented challenges for us as translators. And the other big challenge, which I particularly reveled in because I like that kind of thing, is the translating of metrical poetry. So the sections where Gabby is recreating the meter of the original Martín Fierro poetry was a big challenge as well, because we wanted to render that into metrical poetry in English as well.
Oh, that's tough, yeah.
So,
you add something, Iona?
Yeah, I might add, to kind of continue the theme, I might actually flag up the issue of sex and sex gone Anglo, because that it was a toughie to do that in English and to use English vocabulary, and we found English very lacking. And we tried and we did our best, and we used a very kind of Anglo-Saxon kind of language in those sections, and we kind of had to, because if we didn't, we either would have had to kind of invent the language, or use language that is kind of funny, that's associated with humor, with embarrassment, with immaturity. So that was one challenge that, I mean, I don't think we saw that coming at all in the undertaking of the novel. There was some toughies with violence, the violence in the revenge stories that could be, I mean, it was great, don't get me wrong.
I understand,
we loved doing the violence, we loved doing the sex, but it was challenging, definitely. And then the whole issue of translating Martín Fierro as a concept and as a cultural legacy. That was probably the biggest thing altogether.
But I'm sure you're both academics, so I'm sure you were familiar with Martín Fierro, with the text before. Was it, did you read it again? Was it, I mean, I just want to know if it's, when you're studying, if it's like an important text or it's a marginal text. Because also, since it's verse, it's probably difficult, I guess. Because I'm doing it backwards.
I had read Martín Fierro before, and I just want to be completely transparent. I read it out of a sense of kind of obligation to the Argentinian canon. I wasn't drawn to it specifically because I was drawn to things that were visibilizing women much more. So that's my kind of backstory with Martín Fierro. And I think actually I was waiting, I didn't know it, but I was waiting for the queer feminist answer to Martín Fierro to actually care, and to feel a sort of emotional pull with it. So that's been a big kind of transformation for me. It's also a really nice, this is a bit digressive, but it's a bit of a kind of continuity for my working life with Fiona and our working life with Carolina, the editor at Charco Press, because a long time ago, going back more than 10 years ago, we had a book club. We only read exclusively Argentinian novels that were contemporary at that time. So we read people like Martín Coan, Brizuela, and Frezan, Jorge Acame. And these novels were, if not retellings, were really, really dialoguing with classic literature. sometimes from English literatures and sometimes from Argentinian literatures. So being involved in a project on a retelling, on a feminist retelling, was a great way for us all to work together again after a bit of a hiatus.
And Fiona, what do you think?
Yeah, well, like Iona, I had already read it. In fact, I used to teach Martín Fierro as the very first text on a course on reading Latin American poetry. And also I was aware of it in the 1935 translation by a Scottish guy from Glasgow called Walter Owen, who's actually a great ambassador for Latin American poetry in English. He translated the great Uruguayan epic Tabaré and the Chilean epic La Araucana as well. So I was aware of Martín Fierro, but then when I read Gabby's novel, I went back and read Martín Fierro again, and it was really fascinating to see the kind of seeds that Gabby had taken from Martín Fierro to then weave her novel out of it. So like Iona, I really found that Gabby's novel kind of opened up the original Martín Fierro in such an interesting way. So that was really a delight.
Okay. I wanted to, you people that are hopefully watching us to first, meet the translators and meet Gabby before asking them to read parts of the, not alone, so you can see the work that's been done here. Gaby, yo creo que me entendiste, pero ahora es cuando les estoy pidiendo de leer. They chose some part of it, and I would like you to read this passage so people can see, the beauty of the language and what makes this novel so special, and your job so difficult.
Bajo el imperio de Inglaterra. Un amanecer bajo la lluvia fui albergada yo por mi primer raincoat. For us the British, there's appropriate etiquette for every situation. Empezó a explicarme Liz la etiqueta, los climas y sus montañas, sus desiertos, sus selvas. Los detalles de las vestimentas del imperio me armaron el mundo que, ¿cómo podía ser? No era plano. Hasta entonces no había pensado en eso. Mi mapamundi eran apenas la llanura y algunas ideas difusas. Tierra adentro, Buenos Aires, un abismo lleno de agua y Europa, con su punta española y sus islas británicas, ese más allá desde donde llegaban armas y señores. Se me hizo la pelota y el relato de Gris, a medias castellano, a medias en inglés, me la empezó a poblar de vacas sagradas, saris suaves, curry picante de la India, África y sus negros pintados de colores, sus elefantes de colmillos largos como arbustos, sus huevos enormes de avestruz, ese primo mayor de los ñandúes, los pantanos de arroz en toda China, sus pagodas de techos enrulados, los sombreritos de paja como platos de punta al cielo.
Under the British Empire. One rainy dawn, I put on my first ever raincoat. The subjects of the British Empire have appropriate etiquette for all occasions, Liz explained, outlining their manners and mountain ranges, their climates, deserts, and forests. The details of all the clothing in the empire built the world for me, a world that was round, not flat. I'd never thought about it till then. My world map hardly stretched beyond the Pampas and a few vague notions, Indian territory, Buenos Aires, a watery abyss, and then Europe, with Spain at the bottom, and up there the British Isles, cradle of men and weapons. This ball-shaped world came to life through Liz's stories, half in Spanish, half in English. She started populating it with sacred cows, soft saris, hot Indian curry, African tribesmen with painted faces, elephants with tusks the length of a small tree, huge eggs laid by ostriches, the larger cousins of our ñandúes, Chinese paddy fields, curly-roofed pagodas, and coolie hats pointing up to the sky. As we travelled, I began to understand some of these things, but the rest I understood much later, over the course of all the time we spent together. I found it hard to reconcile myself to the idea that we were on the bottom half of the globe when we seemed to be on the top. But no, Liz was sure that Great Britain was on top.
Okay, that's at the very beginning of the novel when Liz and the China are started when they are in the van. I don't know, van is not the appropriate word because there was no vans there, but you know, they were traveling together. But specifically, for example, about the China, I don't want to go too technical about it because, of course, this is, you know, I'm not a translator, so I can't go too technical. But there are things that out of curiosity, I want to know. Like, for example, China, it's a word that we use to describe or certain literature, but also I think it's still used in conversation sometimes. A certain type of woman, but of course it also means China, and it also means a woman that comes from China. There's many things like that, and there's many decisions to make because also Liz sometimes speaks in English in a text that is in Spanish. So, and there's also like local things about, you know, the animals, the words in Guarani, for example, that is one of the languages of the Indians, very specific things, the fortines, the estancia, things that have no really, you know, a translation, a correct translation in English. Because there's no fortines in English, basically. So without getting too technical, I want to, you know, to give me an overview that how you solved this kind of challenges in the translation, because I mean the text is very accessible, is very refreshing, but also for us, for Argentinians, have all this historical, geographical, etc. Data that we just know. I mean, no one has to explain to me what a fortine is. But if I have to explain this to someone that lives in Britain or in New Zealand, I don't know, this, you know, it has to, how did you solve this?
Shall I go first?
Yeah, Fiona first, sorry.
Yeah, so obviously it was an issue. We did spend a lot of time at the beginning trying to work out how much information we needed to kind of work in for an audience that wasn't going to have that framework of knowing Argentinian culture, knowing the history, knowing the original Martín Fierro. So we did have a lot of conversations about that. And sometimes in the early drafts, we put in too much and we made it a little bit, we went a bit overboard on the cultural baggage. And then when we were discussing with the editor, we took some of it out again. But yes, that was definitely an issue. The word China for the main character obviously was probably the biggest difficulty in terms of there not being a single word in English that will do all the work that word does in Spanish. You know, I mean, we've got woman, we've got girl, we've got wife, we've got servant in some cases. It has all these kind of racial, social connotations. And there isn't really a single word in English that will do that. And then the added complication is obviously the pronunciation. An English person looking at the title of the book will naturally read The Adventures of China Iron, not China. And then they have all the associations of China. But actually, in a funny kind of way, it gives the English version a life of its own, because people think China, they think porcelain, they think fragility, and that's coupled with the word iron, which is strength, which is force. So in a way, it kind of gives a different dimension to the character, that she is somehow at the beginning, at least, she's this destitute creature who's fragile, who's you know, breakable, but then she takes on this kind of iron strength as she finds herself sexually and in terms of her own character as she goes through. So I think that doesn't really answer your question about how we decided what to do with it, but it's a sort of
but that's
reflection
more or less
on China.
The kind of challenges that I'm interested in, because I can't really imagine how you would use China. I think it's a very good idea to keep it in the title, just like that, China Iron, and that's it. Iona, how do you want to add something? I guess you talked about it a lot.
Yeah, with China, I think we know now and we understand now that China's untranslatable. But, you know, going back nearly a couple of years now, we didn't kind of know that yet. So we actually worked really hard to try and find an English equivalent to China, and then just realized that was a process of elimination, that's impossible. And then as we worked more and the time went by, we got much more comfortable with the multilingual approach, which after all was Gabby's approach. So we were on the right path. There was just a process maybe of adjustment to so much foreignizing when we were writing English. And with a lot of vocabulary to do with China, we had to be really careful not to overdo words in English that have a North American etymology. So we had to be really careful that we didn't accidentally evoke the Wild West and cowboys. You know, just to keep the gaucho setting, the landscape, the history, the culture, the specificity of Argentina, that was our task. But then occasionally there was the odd exception. So once, for example, China in the novel is translated by us. This just happens once. It's an exception to prove the rule. Is translated actually a squaw, because we were looking for a racialized word, a derogatory word, and we also needed it to fit into the syllable count in the narrative verse, which is toward the end of the novel. So we had these kind of rules of thumb and these guiding principles, and we talked about them. We went on and on and on about them, but then occasionally we just went for something different as well. And sometimes we had a very rational reason why, and other times it was an aesthetic reason, and other times it was a kind of preference, gut feeling, indescribable, quick decision.
Yeah, things are, when it's untranslatable, you go with your gut, I assume you both, Fiona and Iona, are British. Correct me if you're not. But I'm interested in that way, in the personal vision that was for you to encounter a text where Great Britain is the colonial, it's a colonial master represented by Liz. But Liz is a charming character, is ambiguous, is sensual, is a complex representation of this relationship of power. I think this is very important in many ways because of something that Gabby said before, that in our countries there is a fascination. So to only put the colonial master as the villain, let's say, it's basically pamphletary. It doesn't have the complex truth of this. But the power relationship is there. And I wanted to know how, this is probably a very wide question, but I'm really interested in how is the approach to a text that kind of problematizes colonialism. Iona, I would like if you want to start, and then Fiona, if you want to add something.
Liz is a complicated one, and we could discuss that. And she, on the one hand, she is amazing, and she's absolutely the person that you would want to travel with. If you could pick someone to do that journey with, you'd pick Liz. However, she's also got, she's an agent of empire, basically, and she's got this metaphorical dimension as this embodiment of Great Britain. And unlike Gabby, I don't give Scottish people a free pass on extractivism or colonialism. So that's a cultural difference. I absolutely loved translating the descriptions of the imperial project. The descriptions that Liz provide there, they're absolutely amazing. And a lot of readers in English of the Adventures of China and won't kind of know anything about that colonial relationship, and that, okay, Great Britain didn't kind of administer Argentina as a colony, but at the same time it did very much try to invade the mainland twice, and then on that failure, the British certainly find other ways to have their commercial dreams realized off the Argentinian land, and I just think that's absolutely fantastic in this novel. And anyway, one thing that I want to say about Liz is, I think this is maybe just a very personal reading, but I thought she was perhaps rehabilitated because she sticks around for part 3 and the liberation kind of project of part 3. And it's also Liz who has this very interesting conversation with Colonel Hernández, where she asks him about the poem about Martín Fierro, and he admits to her that it's a piece of racist propaganda. So anyway, yeah, Liz is a very, very complex woman. She's really great to think about, to read, to translate, all of it.
And Fiona, what do you think?
Thanks, Iona. I mean, you said an awful lot about Liz, which is great. I would add to that the kind of it's very interesting for a British translator and a British readership, the relationship set up in the text between notions of Englishness, Britishness, and Scottishness, because actually those 3 labels are used quite interchangeably and almost indiscriminately at certain points in the novel. And that causes a difficulty for a target audience who has it very clear in their mind whether somebody's Scottish, English, or sees themselves as British rather than English. So negotiating that was sometimes a bit of a minefield. I mean, people don't tend to talk about either the English Empire or the Scottish Empire. They talk about the British Empire, but at certain points it's El Imperio Inglés in the text and so on. So we had to think about conceptualizations of the empire from the different points of view. I think it's also true, I mean, to echo what Iona was just saying about Liz being rehabilitated, it's really interesting how at the beginning she is doing all the teaching. Gabby was talking about all the items she has in her wagon, the products of the British Empire that, you know, have been extracted from elsewhere and brought, and she's carrying them all about in her wagon. So she's teaching China at the beginning. She gives her a name, she bathes her and baptizes her and all this. So it's very much a power relationship skewed towards Liz. But then later on, she herself is being taught in the 3rd part. She is the one receiving a new name, being baptized, being, you know, taught new cultural ways and customs. So there's that nice shift of the power relationship in the 3rd part, which I think is really fascinating.
Yeah, it is.
But at the beginning, she's very much, we thought she was like a kind of Girl Scout figure, you know, very gung-ho, very prepared for anything. You know, she's got her curry sauce brewing in the back of the wagon. You know, she can make tea. She's got a lightning rod if there's a storm. You know, I mean, she is the archetypical Girl Scout figure, which is great because, you know, the whole adventures of China, and it harks back to that sort of adventure narrative that you get, which is usually a boy's own type genre, but it's such a good girls genre with the figure of Liz. You know, that really sort of vindicates the genre of adventure stories for girls.
Yes, and there's also that I wanted to ask you, it's brief, but there's another, I think, very important translation decision that is about the gender migrations that happen. Like, for example, this is Gaucho, Rosario. Rosario is an ambiguous name. Now it's almost, in Argentina, is almost always a girl's name. But it used to be more ambiguous, like a long time ago. But anyway, it's the choice of Rosario is an ambiguous choice. And but Rosario is a guy. I mean, then is the dog. The dog is called Estrella, and star in Estrella in Spanish is a woman. Es la estrella. well, I don't want to go into when Fierro appears again, because that's kind of be spoiler, but we talked about sex a lot, but also it interests me, this kind of gender fluidity thing, and how to do it, because English doesn't have that so clearly, I think, as a language. I mean, Fiona, if you can start. And oh no, where was the last time? Last time was Iona first, or is Fiona first now?
I think Fiona.
Okay, I'll make a start. Yeah, I mean, it is. There was a lot of interesting discussion about the gender crossing, but I would start by talking about the name Josefina, Josephine, because obviously in the novel she becomes at certain points Jose rather than Josefina, which gives her a kind of ambiguity. And in English, we were able to go from Josephine to Jo, which similarly can be male, female.
Yeah,
Rosario, there's not such a problem for an English reader because they wouldn't necessarily know that that's usually a female name. When he gets shortened to Rosa, that looks more like a girl's name in English, but by then you already know the character, so you just accept that he's somehow got this slightly female-sounding shortened name. But I think with all the performance, even through clothing, of other genders, like Fierro performing female at the end, and Rosa having this girl's name, and China herself having her plaits and having her plaits cut and becoming male. All of this is part of a sort of performative cross-dressing throughout, so it becomes very, very significant strand of the story. Iona, maybe you could talk a bit about Estrella.
Yeah,
yes.
I made just an old-fashioned grammatical error with Estrella, because luckily this was revealed to us probably in about week 2 of the whole project, so it was okay. But at one point in the original it says "se puso alerta," and alerta is an adjective that doesn't change with gender or number. But in my reading, I just saw it as gender female, and I believed that Estrella was a girl doggy. And I didn't know what Fiona was on about until we kind of did the detective work to find out where this misapprehension had happened. Because I also did wonder if she had also become female at some point. But names in general in the novel are so special, and I think there's probably a lot of work to be done by, you know, in literary analysis to talk more about the different names, because as Fiona's just described about baptisms and name giving and multiple names, and also names being denied, China being denied a name until the 2nd decade of her life. There's so much about naming, and not naming in a colonial way, but naming in a kind of liberationist way. So that's really nice. And I'm not sure if Fiona agrees with me on this, and I don't know if I'm right about this, but for me, with my ear in my language of English, when I think about the name that Martín Fierro takes on in part 3 of the novel, I hear something that I don't know is there or not. So he takes on a name that is Caruso, which is Guarani, and which is a name for a woman, and which is named in honor. And there's a lot of kind of naming in honor. He gives himself a name in honor of his lover that he has lost. And yet, to me, I really think that sounds like Robinson Crusoe, which to me evokes again these colonial adventure stories about colonialist people going native. So there's all these kind of complicated wheels and layers that I really, really loved. And I just also want to say that we found out laterally that Josefina is also a homage, and that she is named after the Argentinian literary critic Josefina Ludmer, who codified the Gauchesque. And I mean, that just gives me goosebumps. I think that is absolutely gorgeous. So yeah. the naming is spectacular.
I think so. Well, this is the last question, and but it's kind of important. The last part of the novel that we already discussed with Gabi, to me, is a very, it's about what she talked about, the environmental issues, but also as a translator has a very challenging thing, that it's the inclusion of the language. Basically the ones I could get more is Guarani, because it's something I'm familiar with, because I have family from up there where they still talk Guarani. In Paraguay is a bilingual society, and kind of that provinces in the north of Argentina are too. So kind of my family speaks Guarani. I don't understand anything, but I'm familiar with the words. Of course, I don't think you started studying Guarani or the other languages, but how did you solve this? I mean, I know how you did it because I looked in the translation, but I want people to know, you to tell people how you deal with that, because it's also kind of very important that these languages are out there, because there are languages that are not, I don't think there are languages that are dying, because as I said, there's a whole country, there is Paraguay, there is a bilingual country, and many provinces are, but certainly are languages that are not widely spoken and are kind of, the people think about them as marginal languages, when really these are languages that nations speak. Sorry. So how did you deal with that? Iona, I think it's you first now.
When we got to part 3, where this particular approach really comes into being, we were really happy that we had gone for a multilingual approach. So we were happy, and we were positive about doing it. But it took a lot of work just on the level of sentences to make sure that they actually really scanned, and that they really sounded okay, and that you could grasp meaning and you could grasp an image. Guarani is not a language that is kind of looked after properly outside of these very specific countries and regions that you're talking about, Mariana. And I think you're really privileged to kind of have access. We ourselves had access in a way, but disappointingly, there wasn't much in the way of kind of resources available to us here, dictionaries here, proper academic sources here. So we actually really operated in the modern world in this regard. It's kind of surprising to us both, but in terms of linguistic meaning, when we couldn't find the meaning, then simply WhatsApp. So I don't know, Fiona, if you wanna kind of talk about that.
I'll just say one sentence, because I can see we're nearly out of time now, but just to add to that, yes, I mean, I have a good friend, a Paraguayan friend, José Zamudio, who's a native Paraguayan speaker, and I'd like to say thank you to him now, because he was the person we WhatsApped, and he helped us with the vocabulary and the context for the vocabulary. So that's all, because I know we're nearly out of time now, but that's the way we did it. Iona's quite right. It was very 21st century.
Yeah. So thank you very much. We have to wrap up. It went a bit long, but we are a lot of people, and we speak different languages, and it's kind of difficult. So thank you very much. Thank you to the book festival. I love this festival. I would love to be in Edinburgh now and not here in my house in lockdown. So here's for the future that I hope is better. Thank you very much, all of you. And please read The Adventures of China Iron. It's a marvelous book. And thank you to Charco Press for doing the job. And thank you, Mariana, for translating. And bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mariana.